A very good morning to you. A lot of our viewers are getting very upset that they feel we're not being given all the information, and that maybe our reaction to the terrible things that happened in the Christmas market, maybe our reactions are being managed in some way. What's your view on it? Because it just seems that what we're being told doesn't add up to a credible story.
Well, I think that what I've seen in reaction to that horrific atrocity in Germany, I found it to be some of the reactions to be incredibly questionable. Some people have argued that the background and the supposed ideology of the suspect is very different, or rather doesn't match up to his actions, and I question that, and the reason I do is because their suspect is known to be an anti-Islam atheist activist. And there's many people who seem to be suggesting that this was just a big plan which was hatched up in order to relocate to Germany. In fact, he's a hardened Islamist extremist. And I'll tell you why that theory doesn't add up, because this Saudi refugee, the suspect, relocated to Germany back in 2006. He was granted refugee status in 2016. And are we seriously suggesting that he kept up this act all this time in order to carry out an Islamist terrorist attack as recently as this month? So I think that some of the theories that I've seen being peddled are incredibly suspect in my view.
And we have live pictures on our screen there from Magdeburg. That's floral tributes being laid down by locals, of course, as the entire country comes together in its mourning for those who've been lost and injured. But it's also worth pointing out, Rakib, that here is an individual that was wanted for deportation in Saudi Arabia. There are people coming forward claiming that they've been targeted by him. They are ex-Muslims. And the modus operandi, why would a person calling themselves an atheist, why would a person call themselves an anti-Islamist adopt the modus operandi that's precisely associated with the Islamic terror attacks? There are just a lot of people asking a lot of questions. Do you think we know the full picture yet?
Well, I think that from what has emerged, this suspect is an anti-Islam activist. In my view, he comes across as a militant atheist. And I think that if you look at his social media content, which is there for public consumption, he actually developed a hatred of Germany because he believed that Germany was responsible for the Islamification of Europe. Now, if you are a militant atheist which looks to seek refuge and has been provided sanctuary in Europe, because you are an atheist and you originate from Saudi Arabia, but then you feel that the government, the people and the systems are ultimately responsible for the Islamification of Germany and the European continent at large. In my view, it is plausible that the suspect developed a hatred of Germany. So I think that what we have to look at here is when a refugee moves from the Middle East to Europe, if they develop fresh feelings of betrayal, rejection and persecution, why do they feel that way? And who or what do they hold responsible for having those feelings? Those are the questions that we should be asking.
But Rakib, a lot of people will be saying, irrespective of all of this, we have an individual here who was granted asylum into Germany, along with many others. We are now seeing a huge questioning and awakening, perhaps, in Germany. Has this all been an experiment with consequences which are now repeatedly tragic? We have elections coming up in February, and Elon Musk is saying now that the traditional political parties in Germany have utterly failed the people. The AfD is the only hope for Germany. We have Elon Musk now lending his eye towards Germany in a similar manner, perhaps, towards lending his eye towards reform in the UK. What do you think Elon Musk is playing out here? Do you think he's interfering with foreign democracy, or do you think actually he's being more of potentially of an interventionist, somebody who is saying Europe is heading down a dark and dangerous path and we need to change quickly?
Well, I think the point that we can make in relation to this horrific atrocity is that there's many people in Western Europe who I believe don't quite understand the scale to which their own societies have imported competing violent ideologies from the Middle East. And what that's done has led to the development of multifaceted security threats. And it's also contributed to an increasingly complicated terror threat picture. So I think that we have a very serious problem here. And I think that if we look at what has emerged so far from this case, it's actually a very worrying development, actually, if you have an anti-Islam militant atheist who has potentially carried out a terrorist attack. Of course, we have to let the investigations progress. But if that is indeed what has happened, that's a very worrying development when it comes to terrorism in mainland Europe.
And surely the other very worrying aspect is that we are meanwhile accepting almost as normal the fact that when we go out nowadays, we must be protected by concrete bollards and barriers, and we're being told to be vigilant by the police. In other words, we are sort of accepting that we have to live in fear of attacks like this.
It's absolutely terrible, and that's the truth of it. I think the idea that you have to have such heightened security at Christmas markets because of the threat of terrorism in modern Europe, I think it's a crying shame. I'm not personally Christian. I have a Muslim background, but I think that it's such a joyous time where you have families coming together, and it's such a beautiful thing. But then to have these security threats in the face of that, I actually think it's actually quite tragic.